This is Your News Tonight, the headlines. Forced to flee, now more than 2.5 million people have escaped Ukraine for other countries. The UN estimates that an additional 2 million people have been internally displaced because of the war. Russian troops increased their intensive shelling across Ukraine. Schools and hospitals have been targeted. And for the first time, cities to the west of the country have also been bombed. European leaders gather at the Palace of Versailles to discuss the war, but the bloc makes it clear that there's no fast-track process for Ukrainian EU membership.
And Facebook's owner Meta faces off with Russia over its controversial new hate speech policy.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Per Bergfors Nyberg. The United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 2.5 million people have fled Ukraine and at least 2 million have been internally displaced. This since Russia invaded. Now, Russian troops have stepped up aerial bombardments. For the first time, airstrikes targeted the central eastern city of Dnipro, while troops around the capital, Kiev, are said to be regrouping. And reports of shelling were confirmed in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, cities in the west of Ukraine, which are harboring thousands of people fleeing the conflict elsewhere in the country. Now, further east, hundreds of civilians were said to be inside a psychiatric hospital in the Kharkiv region as it was struck by Russian missiles. Ukraine's defense minister claims that Russian armed forces have killed more civilians than soldiers.
It's impossible to say how many days we will still need to free our land, but it's possible to say that we will do it because we strive for that, because we have reached a strategic turning point. We are already moving towards our goal, towards our victory. This is a patriotic war with a very stubborn enemy who does not pay attention to the thousands of the people and soldiers killed.
Now, let me bring in our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina, who joins me now here in the studio. Sasha, more attacks today, some new cities targeted as well. Could you show us where these attacks have been taking place in Ukraine?
Certainly, 3 cities targeted and shelled this morning, and let's start in the west of Ukraine. These are the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. Lutsk is very close to the border with Poland, Ivano-Frankivsk to the border with Romania. Now, these cities, they've been shelled for the first time, the cities very close to the borders of the European Union. Not only many Ukrainians are there as they fled from central Ukraine, from eastern and southern Ukraine, as you said, many more are crossing these regions and these cities every day when they're trying to flee the country and to go to the European Union to cross those borders. In both of these cases, these were the airfields that they were shelled this morning, and Russia confirmed this, saying that these were the targets there. The third city is Dnipro. Now, Dnipro is the city in central Ukraine. It's a huge city. That's the first time it's been shelled today. This morning, the attack around 6 o'clock in the morning. 3 strikes hit the city, with the buildings of the shoe factory, the apartment block, and the kindergarten nearby being targeted. At least 1 person died. Dnipro, until this morning, was also seen as a rather less dangerous, I can't say safe place, but less dangerous than other places in Ukraine.
Now, looking at the capital, Kiev, we've heard about those Russian troops regrouping today. What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's according to the company Maxar Technologies and their satellite pictures. Apparently, the troops are regrouping northwest of Kiev. You remember, this is the area with all the towns of Irpin, Bucha, and there is an airfield there, Hostomel. So towards Hostomel to Kiev, this is northwest from Ukraine's capital. There are pictures and proofs that there was a column of Russian troops that stayed there. Now they dispersed and regrouped, and according to Maxar Technology, they are now about 5 kilometers closer to Kiev than they were 24 hours ago. And this might mean that they're trying to reach Kiev, the capital, in a different way. Now, according to the presidential advisor, Arestovich, Russian forces did not make any significant progress in the past 24 hours.
Now, the port city of Odessa there on the map, that city is also readying itself for a possible Russian advance. Why is Odessa such an important city strategically?
It is very important strategically indeed. It is the Black Sea coast here, and initially the troops went towards Odessa from Crimea. Now, according to the latest information by the mayor of Odessa and the head of the Mykolaiv region, those ships, they went back to their bases. So which means that this is no longer going to be the attack from the sea. Instead, they do have information that they will try to get to Odessa from Mykolaiv region. As you know, the troops are already in the region of Kherson. They're trying to advance to Mykolaiv, and if they get to Mykolaiv, this is when they can get towards Odessa, because this way they will be able to surround Odessa. And this will happen because of this region, because of the breakaway Transnistria. This is this territory of Moldova, which is not recognized. This is the first, and this is the example of a frozen war that happened in the very early 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Transnistria is this territory here in yellow, and there are permanently around 1,500 Russian troops called peacekeepers that are already there, which means, so if there is movement from Kherson region towards Mykolaiv region, this would mean Odessa will be just surrounded from both sides.
All right, Sasha Vagalina, thank you so much for explaining that to us. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered what the Kremlin is calling volunteer fighters to help pro-Moscow fighters in Ukraine's Donbass region. Euronews reporter Galina Polonska now joins me live to discuss this. Galina, why does Russia need volunteers?
Well, that's a million-dollar question, Per. We have heard from Russian officials that the special military operation, that's how it is officially called in Russia, is going on according to the plan. And today Russia is actually saying that it will allow those foreign volunteers to help, and it is underlined that they will be helping for free. That's what Russians learned when they switched on their TVs, state TVs today, and saw Vladimir Putin talking to the Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu. So Sergei Shoigu reported, I quote, that Russia received a huge number of applications from various countries to come to the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics to participate in what they consider to be the liberation movement. And he underlined that most of the applications came from the Middle East countries, 16,000 at least, and President Putin approved this idea. Today, President spokesman Dmitry Peskov was asked a lot of questions during the press briefing about those volunteers from other countries. Let's listen to what he had to say.
If the Western world so welcomes the arrival of these motley mercenaries from different countries of the world, then there are also volunteers from our side who want to take part in this. The Ministry of Defense has a certain network of units that are in direct contact with the local population of Syria and a number of other countries.
And Galina, the UN Security Council is meeting as we speak to discuss Russia's claims that the US has been developing biological weapons in Ukraine. What factual evidence did Russia present to back up these claims?
Well, so far we have just heard various statements of Russia's officials. Moscow accuses the United States of sponsoring biological laboratories in Kharkiv, Kiev and Odessa, and the head of the Russian military's radiation, chemical and biological protection troops, Igor Kirillov, said that according to their information, most of the documentation, biomaterials and equipment were evacuated to Lviv. And what Russia says is those labs were developing working on some kind of dangerous pathogens to target Russians and other Slavs. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, said that there were almost no doubts that those biological labs were working to develop ethnically targeted biological weapons. Well, the US calls this a biological disinformation campaign, and the White House said that it could be used for a false flag operation.
All right, Galina Polonskaya there reporting on these developments at the UN Security Council. And now for more on Russia's military campaign and strategy, let me bring in Samuel Ramani, who is an associate fellow at the British Defence and Security think tank RUSI. Samuel, I want to start with these warnings, these widespread Western warnings that Russia might be preparing to use chemical weapons. How real is this threat?
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all if Russia were to use chemical weapons in Ukraine. Russia has a long history of claiming chemical weapons false flags. For example, in Chechnya in 1999, it claimed that the Chechen rebels were about to use chemical weapons in Grozny. But 3 years later, in 2002, Russia actually used chemical agents of their own to incapacitate Chechen militants and terrorists in a hostage crisis. And of course, the Russians have acquiesced to the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime in Syria, and they've been claiming very similar chemical false flags like they did in Chechnya in Ukraine, with Sergei Shoigu warning the Americans could do it, and the Donetsk People's Republic in January warning that the Ukrainians could do it. So I'm fully on alert to see this happening.
And we've heard that Russia has confirmed that they used these thermobaric bombs. They're also accused of using cluster munition. I want to ask you, what's Putin's military strategy here? I mean, these very violent attacks on including civilian areas, for example.
Well, it's a sign of the broader recalibration from Russia. The original goal was to launch a very fast blitz towards Kiev, overthrow Zelensky, and install a puppet regime with somebody like Viktor Medvedchuk or an old crony of Viktor Yanukovych. But that strategy is clearly unraveled due to the strength of the Ukrainian resistance. So what the Russians have to do is start encircling major cities with siege tactics. And this is a lot more slow-moving and also a lot more costly to civilian lives. And the use of cluster munitions and the use of thermobaric bombs to basically bomb these cities into submission and encircle them is part of that strategy.
And now he's even bringing in volunteers. That's what he's saying. He's ordered 16,000 volunteers to join the fight. Why have both diplomatic talks and the Western sanctions on Russia failed to stop the war so far?
Well, I think it's because Putin has viewed this war as legacy defining for him. He views it as a major way of restoring the Russian sphere of influence. And this is something that he's been steadily trying to do over the course of the past 2 decades, first in Georgia, then in Crimea, and now in a much bigger fashion in this war. So Putin is not going to give up just because of economic sanctions, which will take a while to bite the Russian economy and lead to the kind of mass protests that could threaten his regime and his hold on power. And diplomacy just seems to be not changing his mind either because he's committed to the war.
Samuel Ramani from the British security and defense think tank RUSI. Thank you so much there for joining us on Euronews tonight. And stay with us here on Euronews. Much more news coming up. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Euronews tonight. Now, after 2 days of talks in Versailles, EU leaders have agreed to inject an additional 500 million euros into the military aid fund for Ukraine. The bloc took the unprecedented step of collectively supplying weapons to Ukraine last week, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said the bloc must do more after European leaders ruled out any sort of fast-track accession to the EU. Now, following the talks, President Macron gave this warning about the effect that the war could have on food supplies for both the EU and further afield.
Whether it's wheat, maize, or cereals more broadly speaking, Ukraine and Russia are two very important producers. Europe is already destabilized by the war. It will be even more so in 12 to 18 months because of what can't be planted right now in Ukraine. Europe, and with it Africa, will be very deeply destabilized in terms of food. We therefore also need to prepare ourselves and re-evaluate our production strategies.
Now, for more on this, let's head over to Versailles and speak to our correspondent Effie Kutsakusta, who joins us now live. Effie, what was the most important outcome from this meeting?
Yes, the EU leaders discussed all the urgent matters related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine: energy, defense spending, the possibility of imposing further sanctions on Russia, and of course Ukraine's bid to join the EU as soon as possible. I would say that there was no concrete result as expected, as this was an informal summit. The most tangible result was the agreement to expand the European Peace Facility by another 500 million euros in order to support militarily Ukraine with more defensive lethal weapons. When it comes to the debate, the longest debate during these 2 days was Ukraine's bid to join the EU. There, the leaders last night discussed it for 3 hours, and this matter has proved to be quite divisive. We have on one side the Eastern European countries that want a clear message, a clear path towards the European perspective for Ukraine and to speed up the process, while others, and namely the Netherlands, Germany and France, that they are not really sure that this is the right time when Ukraine is on war to give it a timeline for an EU membership. And of course, what has been agreed was a consensus, a compromise in this statement, saying clearly that the political message is that Ukraine belongs to the European family and that the process will be fast in order for the Commission to assess the request, but not a clear timeline, no fast-track process. Ukraine has to follow the steps that all countries are following in order to get an EU candidacy and, in the long term, an EU membership.
Now, Effie, Viktor Orban, Hungary's leader, he said in a video on his Facebook page that the EU would not sanction Russian oil or gas, and this was to ensure Hungary's energy supply. How divided would you say that the EU is on this demand for Russian energy exports?
It is because not all countries actually are dependent at the same level on Russian gas and oil. There is always the bloc of the countries, including the Baltics or Poland, that want tougher sanctions, the toughest sanctions on Russia, including this ban. But others are saying that this is not the time to do it because still the EU imports almost 40% of its gas and oil from Russia. So in the short term, they cannot completely cut contracts. It's not only Hungary, it's also Germany and other countries, and they are trying to find ways, alternatives, in order to boost energy independence. Ursula von der Leyen said it clearly that the EU Commission will come up with a new proposal by mid-May with alternatives and ways in order to phase out dependence on Russian gas by 2027.
Effie Kutsakusta live for us at Versailles. Thank you so much for that, Effie. Now, tech giant Meta says it will allow violent speech against invading Russian forces following this war in Ukraine. Here's Matthew in the Cube with more. Matthew?
Well, Per, this move by Meta, the big tech company that owns Facebook, it certainly caused a stir. A statement confirmed that they have made a temporary decision to allow certain forms of political expression that would normally have been banned under Facebook's policies. Users can now post things like "death to Russian invaders." Hate speech directed against either Russian soldiers, President Vladimir Putin, or his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko will be allowed. And according to Reuters, this will apply to Facebook users not just in Russia, who are now accessing Facebook via privately protected browsers, but also Facebook users in other Eastern European countries. Now, this is certainly a shift because up until now, as you can see on Facebook's policies, they do not allow violent speech or support for violence that is directed against any individual or group. And this move, as you can imagine, has generated a strong reaction from Moscow. The Russian embassy in the United States released a statement on Twitter calling on American authorities to take action against Meta over what it has described as extremist activities. The country's state communications watchdog has also now restricted Instagram after an order by prosecutors. Of course, a similar move was made against Facebook earlier this month. And on top of that, Russian citizens are already facing lengthy prison sentences if they are deemed to have shared intentionally fake information about the Russian military. But it isn't just in Moscow that this move by Meta has generated a reaction. The United Nations Human Rights Office has also said that it raises some concerns. Even though Meta says hate speech will still not be allowed against Russian citizens or Russia as a country in general, there are fears from analysts that this new policy will eventually descend into more widespread anti-Russia hate, a country where some citizens, of course, have not voiced their support for the war in Ukraine. And Per, it's also worth noting that when it comes to Twitter, they have not taken any similar move. For now, they are keeping in place their existing policies when it comes to hate speech and violent content online.
All right, Matthew in the Cube. Thank you, Matthew. Still to come here on the program, Russian troops in Ukraine are mounting a ferocious attack on the country, but not all Russians in Ukraine are in favor of the war. Up next, we catch up with Andrei, who lives in Kiev and who strongly opposes the invasion. Stay with us. Welcome back to Your News Tonight. We're going to take a look at Russians living in Ukraine now, many of whom have found themselves in a difficult position since the war began. For some, their homeland's invasion of its neighbor has been devastating, as Mark Armstrong reports.
Andrei Sidokhin is a Russian citizen but lives in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. He's one of many in the same position who flatly reject the Kremlin's illegal and brutal invasion. He wants to help defend Ukraine and is trying.
I've already been to the military enlistment office 5 times, but they sent me back precisely because I have a Russian passport. I tried to somehow get through in another way, and I went to Azov, but so far to no avail. That's why I volunteer.
These are uneasy times for Russians living in Ukraine. Sasha Alexeyeva lives in Lviv, a city near the Polish border. She says she's ashamed of what Russia's doing and says the invasion's broken her heart and many like her.
It's difficult for people who have been in Ukraine for a long time without legal grounds. I know people who have been living here for 10 years without legal grounds, and now they can't leave anywhere, even if they wanted to. And the suspicion on the part of the police, the security services, of course, is significant for them.
Those suspicions create a double sense of helplessness among those with Russian passports and Ukrainian hearts. Andrei Sidokhin will do what he can to protect the people and the country that he loves.
First of all, this is also my home, like for the rest of the people in Kyiv. And I also have to and want to protect it. And besides, if this happens, God forbid, that Russian troops enter here, I would like to meet them with weapons in my hands and not empty-handed.
But for now, all he can do is volunteer.
And we leave you with a no comment from Kyiv, where volunteers have been feeding thousands of soldiers and civilians from a roadside kitchen. Thank you so much for watching Euronews Tonight.
Я уходила из своей.